Hi, accounting students. In this lesson, we are looking at this is the guided practice process for journalizing entries. You should have your file open by now, and in there you will find two pages, two tabs at the bottom. First of all is the blank general journal paper, and then at the bottom on the second tab, you will find the transactions themselves. So today, I'm going to walk you through the process of doing two transactions, and then you are going to complete the second two transactions and submit the document to the Dropbox. So we're actually going to be learning or working on three key skills in this activity. The first one, the main one, obviously, is learning how to journalize transactions. And going through that process, again, we have to make sure that we identify debits and credits and list them properly. But we're also going to learn how to do an opening entry, so the very first entry for a business, and then we're going to learn how to journalize across multiple pages, as you'll see. So first of all, let's look at our first transaction. So here it says, quite literally in this transaction description, that this person, C. Bentz, has started their business. So this is literally the very first entry for this business. And in here, the owner is investing $4,000 in cash, $5,000 worth of supplies, $2,000 worth of equipment, and an automobile worth $8,000. Now, what's important to understand or to think about, again, is that kind of accounting mindset where we are identifying debits. This transaction is a little bit tricky because, in fact, all it does is list debits. If you think about it, we have more cash than we used to, because remember, all accounts at this point are zero. So after the transaction, we have more cash than we used to, which is an asset. We have more supplies, more equipment, and an automobile. All of these things are assets. All of these things are increasing in the balance. So all of these entries are debits. Therefore, we have to figure out by process of elimination what the credit is going to be. Well, the magic word here is investing. So in the same way that the owner is investing $4,000 cash, they are also investing these other four amounts of stuff. Where do we keep track of the owner's investment? In the owner's capital account. And so when the time comes, we're actually going to add up these four values, and that will be the value of the entry to the capital account. Excuse me. So let's go to our general journal paper and kind of get situated. So first of all, we have, this is the very first transaction, so we can put in a page number 1. If it does not actually say this is the first entry of the business, you cannot use page 1, but since it does, we're going to. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the year, and if the transaction doesn't give you, or the setup doesn't give you the year, which it does in this case, then you can use the current year. So we're going to use 2005 as our year, and so that gets its own line. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to list the 3-letter code for, or abbreviation for the month with no period, which in this case is October, so OCT. And this transaction occurs on October 1st, right? So we have that detail there. So we're going to list that October 1st. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to identify those debit accounts. Now, the actual order of the debit accounts doesn't matter. It doesn't have to go in alphabetical order or anything like that, or amount order. All that matters is that debits get listed before credits. So over here next to my October 1st, I'm going to list my cash account. And it doesn't really matter if you want to list the accounts and the amounts, or do whatever you, or list all the accounts first, you can do that. So we have supplies, we have equipment, and we have automobile. So those are the four assets that were listed in, and we know we're getting debits because they are all increasing in value. Now you'll also notice that I've left justified all of these entries here to the left side of the cell, and you're going to see how that kind of changes in a minute. Now, what's kind of not here is the fact that this is the debit column and this is the credit column. They are normally, those titles normally do appear at the top. There we go. All right, and so now going back to our transaction description, we've got 4,000 in cash, 500 in supplies, 2,000 in equipment, and an automobile worth 8,000. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to list those in the debit column. Now, normally I would want to make sure that these are all listed as properly, or these values are all properly formatted. You certainly want to have commas. We do not put in dollar signs at this point. Now, arguably, these are all round dollar values, so you don't strictly need the 2 decimal places of zeros. But in a columnar document, you would have to kind of acknowledge that those exist. All right, so now, as we mentioned before, we need our capital account. So normally we would put in then Cvents, capital. There we go. Now, as I said, this needs to be indented. And so there's a couple of ways that you can do it depending on which spreadsheet program you're using. You can type it in and press the indent button. You can also, now I have to outdent. You can press that indent button and then start typing. Oh, maybe you can't. Let's try that again. Cvents, there we go, capital. Or you can also type it in as spaces. And it doesn't really matter how you do it as long as you're consistent. So if you want to do 1, 2, 3 spaces and then Cvents, capital, that's fine. You can also do 5 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to really make it stand out a bit more. It really doesn't matter as long as you're consistent. Capital. The easiest way is to type it in and then hit the indent button. Now, as I said, we have to make sure that we have a balanced transaction. So we're going to add up the amounts of these 4 debits, and that's going to be the amount of the investment that we had. So in this case, if we do the math, it works out to be $14,500. Right, so now what we're looking at here is kind of a visual, and this is really important. So here we have all of our debit accounts and the amounts kind of to the left of the document. The account names are listed left justified up against the line. The amounts are listed in the debit column, which is on the left. And then we have this kind of angled thing down going to the right. So now we have Cvents capital indented to the right, and we have the credit amount listed in the right-hand column. Yep. So then the last thing that we need to do then is to put in a journal or a transaction explanation. So we're going to put in, because this is the opening entry, the official explanation that we will always use for this is the opening entry. And so we list that at the bottom. And then the very last thing we're going to do is to make sure that our account or our transaction balances. So again, looking here, we have $14,500 worth of debit. And over here on the right, we have $14,500 worth of credit. We are now balanced. Now we can move on to the next transaction. Before we do that, though, we want to make sure that we kind of acknowledge or recognize the fact that we have used up this incredibly short piece of journal paper, and we are now moving on to a new page. And so as such, certain things are going to happen. So the first thing is the page numbers have to be listed continuously. So now that we have this page 1, this one has to be page 2. Next thing we're going to do, because we are starting a new page, the date information is going to get repeated. So we're going to put our 2005. We're going to just double check and see when our next transaction occurs. It is on October 5th. So our month stays the same, and then we're going to have a new date. So we're going to put in our 3-letter abbreviation for the month, which is October, OCT, and then we're putting in the date of the 5th. Now, this is very, very important. Because this page is longer, we're going to be listing more transactions on it. As such, this is important. The date, in the date, the year and the month do not get repeated with each transaction. The year only ever gets listed at the top of the page. The month abbreviation only ever gets listed with the first transaction for that month. So if I go on and I have like 3 more transactions in October, that abbreviation will not get repeated. The only thing that gets put in is the date. Even if it's repeated, the date will get put in here. The only time we will add anything new in this column is if the year or the month changes. So presumably at the end of October, if we had a transaction in November, then somewhere down here where that begins, we would put in the short code for NOV, but not the year because that hasn't changed. All right, so going back to our general journal our list of transactions now, we are now looking at a transaction for October 5th. In this case, C. Benz has taken out a bank loan for $600 and has deposited the full amount of that into the bank. So thinking again about our debits and credits, we have put an amount of money in the bank, so our bank account has increased in value. We have an increase in assets, so that's going to be our debit. We have then taken out, or which means that we've applied for and received a bank loan for $600. So before we had no bank loan, now we have a bank loan for $600. Bank loan is an asset, it's gone up from 0 to 600, so that is going to be our credit in this case. So going back to our general journal paper, we are going to our October 5th line. As I said, we now have more cash than we used to. We keep our cash in the bank account. And what did I list that up above here? Uh-oh, should have been bank. Sorry about that. Okay, so then going back to this, so then we have a bank and we have a debit entry for $600. Again, making sure that our work is all nicely formatted. And then we have an entry for a bank loan, which again, because it's our credit, we're going to indent that. And then we're going to put our $600 balance in credit on the other side. And then the last thing we need to do, or second to last thing we need to do, is to put in our explanation. So we received a bank loan, I before E except after C. We don't need to put in the amount because it's in the transaction, but we just need to know what it is. So to receive a bank loan. Now, some of you may be thinking or wondering about this PR column. As I mentioned, this is a posting reference column. So that's what PR stands for. We're going to learn about what this is in Chapter 7 and how it's used. But basically, it's used as a cross-referencing system between the journal and the general ledger. Right. So then the very last thing that you're going to do is make sure that you're balanced. So we look at these two entries. We have $600 worth of debit. We have $600 worth of credit. We can now move ahead and do the next transaction. Now, I'm going to kind of get you started on this one, but it's going to be up to you to complete it. So in this case, we have a transaction for October 8th. The month has not changed, so we are not going to repeat our month abbreviation. We're just going to put the 8. Then we're going to look at the transaction here that we have. So we have performed advertising service for $1,250. That sounds like a revenue entry to me. This is us providing our service and we've received value for that. The person that we did it for is paying us $350 in cash. So we have an increase in cash. That sounds like a debit. And they have agreed to pay the balance in the future, which sounds like an account receivable. So in this case, we're going to have 3 lines in our journal entry. We're going to have a debit for bank. We're going to have a debit for accounts receivable, J. Sully, and then we're going to have a credit to our revenue account. So that is my hint, my sort of starting for you to help get you started on that. So go ahead and complete the last 2 entries in the journal paper. So what's going to happen is you're going to skip a line. Make sure that you always leave a blank line in between entries. We are not going to put in anything for the month because that is not getting repeated. And we always put in the date, which is the 8th. So from there now, you're going to complete the last 2 transactions that will go there. Please make sure that you save the file and then submit it to the Dropbox.